Dr. Evelyn Marks always felt more at home in the cold, sterile environment of her lab than in the chaotic warmth of human connection. With her doctorate from MIT in bioengineering and a mind that thrived on solving the impossible, Evelyn was one of the youngest scientists to be awarded lead status at the government-funded Biosynthesis Research Division. Here at this off-the-books facility, hidden deep in a remote forest, Evelyn pursued her obsession: resurrecting extinct species using advanced genetic manipulation. It wasn't just about dinosaurs. Evelyn wanted to push the limits of evolution itself, to create life beyond nature's intentions. Her marriage had ended 2 years ago, slowly unraveling when Richard, her ex-husband, realized there would always be something between them, something he couldn't touch or compete with: her work. Evelyn hadn't fought him when he filed for divorce. He had accused her of not caring enough, but the truth was simpler. She had never loved him in the first place, not the way she loved her research. The lab was her sanctuary. She was surrounded by other researchers, but they were mere distractions, competitors more than colleagues. There was Dr. Alan Lucas, the senior biologist whose attention lingered on her too often, too long. He wasn't subtle about it either. The way he leaned into her space, the way his eyes slid over her body when he thought she wasn't looking, it made her skin crawl. And yet, the more she rejected him, the harder he pursued. There was a cold thrill in seeing his frustration grow every time she refused him. She told herself it didn't bother her, that she was in control. Then there was Gregor, a quiet young man desperate to prove himself, eager to impress but utterly unremarkable. And Miriam, the only other woman on the team, simmered with resentment at Evelyn's authority, always looking for ways to undermine her. Evelyn didn't care. None of them mattered. After months of relentless experimentation, Evelyn finally achieved the breakthrough she had dreamed of. Using genetic fragments extracted from amber fossils and CRISPR technology, she spliced together strands of dinosaur DNA with avian and mammalian sequences. The first embryo survived. It was implanted into an artificial womb in the containment chamber, where it began to develop at an astonishing rate. The creature that emerged weeks later wasn't a replication of any known dinosaur. It was something new, sleek, intelligent, and undeniably beautiful. She named him Calum, after the constellation. He was unlike the other specimens. Golden scales shimmered beneath soft feathers along his spine, and his sharp amber eyes seemed to study the world with eerie intelligence. He moved with precision, every step a deliberate choice, every glance unsettlingly aware. Most importantly, Calum imprinted on Evelyn from the moment he hatched. He responded only to her voice, ignored the other researchers, and displayed signs of rapid cognitive development. He wasn't just intelligent, he was evolving. And Evelyn felt something stir inside her that she hadn't expected. A strange, magnetic connection. He was hers. Evelyn was used to working in male-dominated spaces. She had learned early on how to make herself untouchable. Cold, aloof, unreachable. Men were easy to manage when they realized she wasn't interested. And over the years, Evelyn had perfected the art of quietly deflecting unwanted attention. Until Lucas. Dr. Alan Lucas wasn't the first man to think he could charm his way into her life, but he was the most persistent and the most entitled. It started subtly at first. Little things. He'd bring her coffee without asking, linger at her station longer than necessary, crack jokes about how she worked too hard. "You've got to find time to live, Evelyn," he'd say with a grin that made her skin crawl. She would nod politely, hoping he'd get bored and move on. But Lucas didn't get bored. He grew bolder. He'd stand too close, brush his hand against hers when passing equipment, or ask personal questions under the guise of small talk. "You've got to have someone waiting for you at home, right?" he'd say, as if fishing for weakness. Evelyn always responded the same way, with silence. But silence only seemed to fuel him. It became clear that Lucas's interest in her wasn't just idle curiosity, it was a need to possess. Evelyn saw it in the way he watched her, a predatory hunger simmering just beneath the surface. Lucas wasn't interested in her brilliance or her work. He wanted control. He wanted to conquer her the way men like him always tried to conquer things they couldn't understand. And that made him dangerous. One evening, Evelyn was reviewing Calum's behavioral patterns on her tablet when she sensed someone standing behind her. Lucas. She didn't have to turn around to know it was him. The way the air shifted when he entered a room was distinct, oppressive. "Still here, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice too casual. "I'm always here," she replied without looking up, hoping he'd take the hint. He didn't. Lucas moved closer, leaning over her shoulder, invading her space in a way that made her jaw tighten. "You've really got to learn how to unwind. All this work isn't good for you." Evelyn resisted the urge to roll her eyes. "I'm fine, Lucas." "Come on." His voice dropped into what he probably thought was a seductive tone. "You know I could help you relax." Evelyn turned to face him, her expression sharp and unyielding. "I'm not interested." Lucas blinked, clearly startled by the bluntness of her response. But then slowly, a smug smile curled across his lips. He thought she was playing hard to get. "Don't be like that," he said, stepping closer until the edge of the lab table pressed against Evelyn's hip. "You're not as cold as you pretend to be. I see how you keep everyone at arm's length, but you don't have to do that with me." Her patience snapped. "What part of no don't you understand, Lucas?" The smile vanished from his face, replaced by a flicker of anger. He wasn't used to being rejected, especially not by a woman he wanted. "You're making a mistake," he said quietly, his voice filled with a quiet menace. "I'm not a bad guy, Evelyn. I just want to get to know you. What's so wrong with that?" Evelyn's lips curled into a cold smile. "What's wrong is thinking you're entitled to something just because you want it." For a moment, Lucas just stared at her, his face dark with frustration and disbelief. He wasn't used to women talking to him like this. Then he laughed, a bitter, humorless sound that grated against Evelyn's nerves. "You think you're better than everyone, but you're not." He leaned closer, his voice low and venomous. "You're going to regret this." Weeks passed, and Caleb's development continued to defy expectations. He was learning faster than any of the other specimens, faster than any animal should. He seemed to anticipate Evelyn's moods, reacting to her presence with a kind of devotion that was unsettlingly human. Late one evening, Evelyn stayed behind in the lab, long after the other researchers had left. She stood outside Caleb's enclosure, watching him move gracefully through the chamber, his golden scales glinting in the low light. When their eyes met, something shifted in the air between them. It wasn't just animal instinct, it was intent. Caleb pressed his snout against the glass, his breath fogging the surface. Evelyn's pulse quickened. She felt an inexplicable urge to reach out, to touch him, to see what would happen if she crossed the barrier between them. She pressed her palm to the glass, and Caleb mirrored the gesture from the other side. Her heart raced. Evelyn sat in her office, staring at the containment chamber through the glass wall. Caleb prowled inside, the golden shimmer of his scales gleaming in the low lab lights. He moved with deliberate elegance, tail swaying slowly, each step more precise than the last. It was becoming impossible to think of him as just a creature. The rational part of her mind screamed at her to stop what she was doing, but every night she found herself drawn back to him, like an addict to a forbidden thrill. His presence stirred something in her that she couldn't explain, something primal, something dangerous. Her pulse quickened as she typed in the override code for the enclosure's security system. The heavy glass door slid open with a soft hiss, the barrier between them now gone. Every instinct told her this was insane. She stepped inside, her breath shallow as the door sealed behind her with a dull thud. For a moment, Caleb stilled, his golden eyes locking on hers. The air between them thickened, charged, electric. Evelyn stood frozen. She knew this was the moment of truth. Would he see her as a threat, a plaything, or something more? Caleb lowered his head slowly, almost curiously, and stepped toward her with a deliberate grace that sent shivers down her spine. He was close enough now that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Easy," Evelyn whispered, though whether she was talking to him or herself, she didn't know. Caleb moved closer until the tip of his snout brushed against her neck, a touch so light it was almost a caress. Evelyn's breath hitched. The soft rasp of his scales sliding against her skin felt intimate. This was no ordinary animal behavior. There was intention in the way he pressed into her, his nose trailing along the curve of her jaw, as if testing her reaction. Evelyn let out a shaky breath, her hand trembling as she reached up to touch him. Her fingers grazed the smooth, warm scales along his neck, and Caleb let out a low, rumbling purr that vibrated through her bones. The sensation was intoxicating. She felt her heart pound as his body pressed against hers, his feathers brushing lightly against her arm. Every inch of him radiated power, but he was gentle, almost reverent, and Evelyn couldn't stop herself. She leaned into him, letting her hands trail down his spine, feeling the play of muscle beneath his scales. He responded immediately, nuzzling her neck with more insistence, a possessive edge creeping into his movements. Her breath grew shallow as the lines between scientist and specimen dissolved completely. This wasn't just curiosity or fascination, it was desire. Salem's amber eyes flickered with something that felt unsettlingly close to understanding. He knew exactly what this was. For a fleeting moment, Evelyn thought of everything she was about to lose: her career, her reputation, her sanity. But none of it mattered. Not in this moment, not with him. Evelyn knew what she was doing was insane, but she couldn't stay away. Every night she returned to the lab, drawn to Caleb with a desire that defied logic. Their encounters grew bolder, more intimate, as the line between creator and creation blurred into something primal and irresistible. But Caleb's behavior began to change. He became possessive, reacting aggressively when other researchers approached Evelyn. One day when Lucas tried to talk to her again, Caleb let out a low, warning growl from his enclosure. Lucas flinched, but Evelyn felt a twisted satisfaction. Caleb was protecting her. The tension between Evelyn and Lucas had been building for weeks. His passive-aggressive comments, his lingering touches, the way he watched her too closely whenever she was around Caleb, it was all growing unbearable. He had crossed lines she didn't know how to uncross. And tonight, she knew it was coming to a head. Evelyn was preparing Caleb's evening examination when Lucas stormed into the lab, his face flushed with anger. His eyes burned with jealousy and frustration. "I'm not stupid, Evelyn," he said, slamming the door behind him. "I know what's going on between you and that thing." Evelyn didn't even flinch. "You don't know anything, Lucas." She kept her voice calm, cold, but her heart pounded in her chest. Lucas took a step closer, his hands clenched into fists. "You think I haven't noticed? The way you look at him, the way he reacts to you, it's disgusting." Evelyn turned to face him fully, her expression sharp as a scalpel. "You're obsessed, Lucas. You think if you make me feel guilty enough, I'll let you into my life? Into my bed? You have no idea who you're dealing with." His face twisted with rage. "You think you're better than everyone, that you're untouchable. But you're not, Evelyn. And when the others find out what you've been doing, they'll shut this place down. They'll kill that thing you're so obsessed with." The threat landed like a blow. Evelyn's stomach twisted with fear, and something darker. She wasn't about to lose Caleb. "I won't let you hurt him," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Lucas laughed bitterly. "You can't protect him. Not from me, not from the others. You've lost your mind, Evelyn." He took another step forward, and Evelyn's hands shot out instinctively, shoving him back. Lucas stumbled but caught himself, his face darkening with fury. "You bitch," he snarled. "You'll regret this." Before Evelyn could react, a low, guttural growl echoed from the other side of the room. Caleb was watching them, his golden eyes gleaming with dangerous intent. The raptor hybrid moved with terrifying speed, leaping from his enclosure in a blur of muscle and scales. Evelyn barely had time to register what was happening before Caleb slammed into Lucas, pinning him to the floor with deadly precision. Lucas screamed, thrashing beneath the weight of the creature, but it was useless. Caleb's claws dug deep into his chest, drawing blood that spilled across the white lab tiles. "Stop!" Evelyn shouted, but her voice was hollow, more out of habit than conviction. A dark, forbidden part of her didn't want Caleb to stop. Lucas gasped for breath, his eyes wide with terror as Caleb's claws pressed harder. "Evelyn, please!" She hesitated. For the briefest moment, she considered letting him live. But then she thought of all the times Lucas had touched her without permission, all the times he had tried to control her, and the threats he had made against Caleb. She made her decision. "Do it," she whispered. Caleb's amber eyes flickered with understanding, and then he tore into Lucas's throat with a savage snarl. The scream was brief, cut off almost instantly as blood sprayed across the lab. Lucas's body twitched once, then went still. Evelyn stood frozen, her chest heaving, as the room fell into silence. The only sound was the drip of blood pooling on the floor. Caleb turned to her, his muzzle stained red, his golden eyes filled with something she couldn't quite name. Loyalty, devotion, love. And in that moment, Evelyn knew he had killed for her. With Lucas dead in the lab in chaos, Evelyn knew there was no turning back. The facility would shut down, and Caleb would be destroyed if they found out the truth. She made a decision. They would escape, together. Evelyn released the other specimens, creating a distraction as alarms blared throughout the facility. In the chaos, she and Caleb slipped out into the night, vanishing into the wilderness beyond the lab's walls. As they disappeared into the darkness, Evelyn felt a strange sense of freedom. She had broken every rule of science, of ethics, of nature itself, and she had done it all for something far more dangerous than love. She had done it for him. In the remote wilderness, far from civilization, Evelyn and Caleb began a new life together. They were fugitives, outlaws of science and nature, but they were free. And as Evelyn lay beside her creation, feeling the warmth of his body against hers, she knew that she had crossed a line no one else dared to cross. And she didn't care.